Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Gravy. And we're moving on to Chapter 3 today of The Rustles, a story that I wrote for Isaac and Theo, and for anyone else with a young mind, whether you're a grown-up or not. Bernie and Ash didn't know this, but Chris hadn't been able to nap at all that morning. While they had been sharing and talking, Chris had taken a big risk, because there was something that needed finding out, so new things could then be shared with the others. There was only one way this information could be found, though, so a decision was made to get as close to the giant's house as possible. Although the giants were so enormous, huge and loud, and could easily crush a Russell without even knowing it, they seemed to be friendly with each other and were very easy to spot coming. Because the Russells were so small, they had the advantage in being able to get out of the way of the giants, or simply just not be anywhere near them when their huge tramply feet crashed down on the ground. Today, though, Chris had decided that as the deep voice had already been talking outside loudly, it was a morning when there could be an opportunity to find out information about things that had been heard recently. Holly's mum and dad were sitting outside on the patio near the kitchen doors, having a coffee and nibbling some pastry treats from the local bakery. Holly's dad had an envelope in his hand and tore the top open carefully, then began to read it. A smile came across his face after just a few seconds. Haha, it's from the school again. I think some of our summer holiday may just need to fit around this project. Holly's going to be all over this, isn't she? As he handed the letter and envelope to Holly's mum, a tiny scrap of paper from the envelope drifted down from the table, was caught on the gentle breeze and nearly landed on Chris, who had sneaked very, very carefully past the small pond and all along the wooden railway sleeper vegetable beds. There had been a moment where a scurrying woodlouse had almost caused an injury, but Chris had managed to jump out of the way, and was thankful that the Russell's body fur would usually soften any bad landing. Holly's mum was now nodding and agreeing. Oh, this is a great idea. I loved hedgehogs when I was little, and it's such a shame we don't see them anymore. I know next door they say they hear them snuffling around sometimes, but it'll be great if we can encourage them back to our garden too. Chris was glad now the effort had been made, as the word hedgehog had popped up again. Chris didn't know what a hedgehog was yet, but felt sure that this mysterious thing must be some kind of animal from the way Holly's mum was talking. What Chris didn't know was that both of Holly's parents were science teachers. Her mum, Laura, was the head of the science department at a local secondary school and was a very well-known writer on the subject too. Her textbooks and research were used at universities, and she had met Holly's dad when they were both studying. Holly's dad, Simon, was a primary school teacher. He was considered to be the naughty one on the teaching team because he thought that science was better taught outside, where science and scientific processes were just happening all over the place. Well, that's what he said anyway. Some teachers didn't approve, and some didn't like getting dirty or cold, so this meant that Simon got to take most of the lessons for the school, which was fine with him. The children all loved them, and they all learned a lot too. Chris knew it was definitely, absolutely the right place to be now, and at the right time too, as Simon continued the conversation. Next door are happy for us to make a hole in the fence at ground level, because we chatted about it the other day over the wall. It says here that it's an important part of the plan, so they want to encourage any hedgehogs in the area to move from one garden to the next. Laura looked pleased at this idea, took another sip of her coffee, and sat back in a chair and smiled. Well, I didn't think we would be sawing holes in fences this summer holiday, or finding food and other things suitable for cute spiky creatures, but you know what? I think it's a lovely idea, and an important one for the hedgehogs and for the children to try and make a difference. Although I expect we'll be seeing a fair bit of Jake in the next few weeks too. Simon nodded and mirrored Laura's smile as he said, what we know about hedgehogs though, and I'm sure Holly and Jake will know too, is that hedgehogs won't just turn up in the daytime. I sense that a sleepover may be needed, or even a camp out. Chris was now feeling very pleased with the results of the long journey from the bottom of the garden up to the patio. It wasn't clear yet why hedgehogs needed to move from garden to garden, but it was now clear that they were of a certain size, spiky too, and maybe chose to nap in the daytime, just like the Rustles did. Knowing new things always made Chris happy, and though the long and careful creep back down to the bottom of the garden wasn't easy, a blackbird had landed very close by and pecked a worm from the grass. The garden sprinkler had been turned on and caused what felt like a flood on the ground, and more seeds spilled out from the bird feeders and came crashing to the ground like little boulders. But Chris knew that later Ash and Bernie would be very impressed when they heard the new information. The Rustles were unlike any other creature that you may have looked at in a book, watched on a television, visited at a zoo, or seen in a lesson on an interactive whiteboard. They were very, very, very small. But in a lot of ways, they were a lot like you and I, because they talked and shared, ate and worked together, felt lots of the same emotions that we do, and they liked to be with other Rustles for company and for safety. They were also, and this is one big difference, almost completely covered in soft and fluffy fur. The Rustles didn't really know if it had grown at some point, and it didn't seem to get any longer, so it didn't concern them or cause any problems. In fact, it was brilliant for staying warm in the dark times, what we would call winter, and also acted as a good disguise when they were moving around. It would be easy to look straight at a Rustle and not even know that you were seeing one. The only thing that really stood out on a Rustle's face was its nose. A Rustle's nose, compared to the rest of it, was quite long and pointy. It was very useful for parting grass while walking around, and was also a fine tool for finding ripe berries and sniffing out food. If you ever saw a Rustle, which of course you never will because you are too loud and thumpy, at first you would probably just stare at it, just like the cat did. Their fluffy bodies are similar to ours, having 2 legs and 2 arms, with feet and hands poking out of the fluff. The heads, though, are a bit different, because they live in dark places and need to see and hear very well indeed. There's no fluff on a Rustle's ear, which looks like a tiny round saucer, and can swivel and move to catch noises from any angle. Their eyes, too, are very big compared to their heads, as yours would be if you lived in the dark places that they do. It wasn't very often that exciting things happened in their corner of the world, and this usually suited them very well. But recently, the Rustles were all sensing that something was in the air. They were creatures who followed a routine, but recently the routines around them had been different. The giants were talking to each other over the fence more often. Bernie had found the courage to share his strange dreams, with even stranger voices living in them, and Chris now had discovered important information about new and wonderful creatures, which sounded as though they were waiting to walk from garden to garden, given the chance. As the light began to fade, the Rustles started to stir. Although they were only very tiny, they still needed to eat regularly, and the evening was the easiest and safest time to do it. Ash was already up and about before Bernie and Chris both lifted their shells at the same time and quietly wiggled their way down to the pond. The last birds of the day had been having a drink and a splash before all flying off to roost or sleep, so the edging stones were dotted with large drops of water. Some of them were big enough to look like small domes, the tops of which bounced when the Rustles poked them. Without needing to say anything to each other, Bernie held a small seed husk next to one of them, while Chris approached the other side of the watery blob. A quick nod to check all was well, and then Chris carefully poked the blob with the sharp end of the piece of grass, which popped it open. Bernie filled the seed pod with the flowing water and took a drink, and filled it again and handed it to Chris. After they had put the seed husk down nearby for the next day's drinking, Bernie looked around to check nothing was watching them or could be listening in, and began talking. That's better. I don't know about you, Chris, but I've been napping a lot today, and was really ready for that. I didn't see you around much this morning, though. Have you been napping a lot too? Chris wanted to tell Bernie everything about the new information all at once, but felt it was better to share it when Ash was around too. Chris preferred an audience to just talking to one. I replied, no, not really, Bernie. In fact, I went for a long walk earlier on. I had a few adventures. I found out about a giant spiky creature, and then I heard some strange secrets." Bernie's face was already looking interested, so Chris continued, feeling safe and confident that arranging an audience would now be an easy task. Sometimes things could be achieved more by not saying something rather than by saying a lot. "The giants are making big plans, but it wouldn't be fair to tell you just on your own and not Ash too. I expect we'll bump into each other at some point soon." Bernie was now already remembering where Ash's shell was and planned to go there straight away. Unlike quite a lot of the things Chris shared, this story actually sounded quite special and exciting, and Ash was bound to have something to say about it. "Wait a minute there, will you, Chris? Weird things have been happening recently, and I think we should share what we know. Well, what you know. Just wait there, okay? Please?" Chris nodded, slowly and with eyes closed. It looked as though permission was being granted to access great wonders and revelations. Bernie had seen this look many times before, though, so set off without further comment, and was soon near to where Ash's snail shell had been earlier that day. There wasn't any sign of Ash, but Bernie wasn't keen to hang around and wait, so decided to go to where Ash liked to look for food. Luckily, Ash was a creature of habit, so when Bernie had nearly reached the wild strawberry plant, just next to an old and mouldy gnome, Ash's happy, song-like words drifted through the dusk and reached Bernie's fluffy ears. "A tiny jewel, a dotted treat. You're juicy, tasty, good to eat. I'll take a bit, but leave the rest. You are the fruit I love the best." Ash was covered in strawberry juice and tiny seeds, but had a mouthful of red and fleshy fruit and was chomping and slurping very contentedly. A Rustles fluff and fur would often become matted and tangled with fruit and food and all kinds of tiny bits and bobs, but it had a way of cleaning itself naturally. The Rustles lived at the darker, wetter end of the garden, so they freshened up naturally when they moved through the dewy grass in the morning, and a rain shower would do a good cleaning job too, if they were out looking for snail shells to shelter in. Occasionally, when the time was right and the wind was blowing strongly too, white dandelions would let go 1,000 floating fluffy seeds, and these little umbrella-shaped treats were caught by the Rustles eagerly and then stored under old pots, if they could find a way to crawl into them. When the sky was very clear at night sometimes, the garden became very cold, and the Rustles had found that by going to their dandelion store and rolling around in the seeds, they would stick to their fluff and act like another layer of warmth. The Rustles were actually very resourceful, without really knowing it. They tried to use everything around them if they could, but always just took what they needed, and nothing more. Bernie hadn't eaten anything yet, but was in a hurry to tell Ash that there was something new and exciting that Chris could share with them, so ignored the rumbling sound under the tummy fluff and ran straight over. "Hello, friend. We need to go and see Chris right now. There is information and news that has been discovered, and I don't even know what it's about yet, or actually anything at all, but we have to go and find out. Chris has got that 'I'll tell you and you will be impressed' look, so it must be good." Ash looked at Bernie, slowly wiped some strawberry pulp away, and then smiled. This little look told Bernie that Ash was happy to go along with the plan. Maybe he wasn't as excited as Bernie was, but recognised that it was an important thing to Bernie, so was going to trot along merrily to find out what Chris had to broadcast to them both. Considering how small and furry a Russell is, it is remarkable how much they could pack into just a small smile. And we'll leave it there for today. I'll pick up tomorrow with Chris's sharing of information about hedgehogs and science projects and all kinds of exciting things like that. I hope you enjoyed it today, and do tune in tomorrow for more from the bottom of Holly's garden. It's simple and it's gentle and it's not overly scary, which I think maybe at the moment is a bit of what we all need. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.